All right, everyone. Listen, this is just a quick overview of the shoulder joint, just to help you guys understand a little bit what you're contending with. One of the challenges we have for those of you with frozen shoulders and shoulder issues is that if you look at the space here, so here's your humeral head. This is the glenoid labrum. And this space in here, your rotator cuff tendon runs in this space, and this is the subacromial space here. You've got about 10 millimeters or less, roughly, of space in here, so not very much. And women, sometimes it's often less. So part of the challenge we have is that, of course, with issues with inflammation, if there's fluid that fills up inside of here from trauma or whatever the case may be, if the space actually becomes less, then of course it takes that 10 millimeters, it makes it less, obviously. So it fills up full of fluid, there's not much room to move in here. And of course, the ability for that shoulder to move. So what's supposed to happen is that as this arm elevates, right? So you imagine this will pivot into here, into the socket. Now, as it pivots, the muscles of the rotator cuff are designed. Let me spin this guy around. Whoops. So the muscles around the rotator cuff are actually designed. They'll come through here, and they'll actually pull the shoulder in. And look at the angle here. So it'll actually pull the shoulder down. So what it does, it actually pulls that ball down and away from this space. Right? So as the shoulder elevates up, as the arm moves out to the side, reaching overhead, this ball is to be pulled down away from that space. And again, it's about 10 millimeters. If the musculature in around our shoulder blade is not sufficient, it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing, then of course you run into the problem with impingement. And let's look at here. Let me go back to the beginning here. And that's a muscle to this guy. So here we have the muscles in around the rotator cuff. So we have the infraspinatus. We have the supraspinatus muscle, right? We have the teres down here. Teres minor. Spin this guy around. Bring him over here. All right, get this toolbox out of the way. Let's see here. There, that's what I'm looking for. All right. So I'll spin this guy around here. Can you see underneath here? So this is subscapularis. So this is the muscle underneath the shoulder blade. Let me back him away here so you can see what's going on. Right? So this is underneath the shoulder blade. So that's the subscapularis. You also have your serratus anterior. It's another part of this whole complex. It's why the shoulder is a challenge. So all these muscles here, the muscles in the undersurface, all have to be firing properly. And it's called glenohumeral rhythm, trying to get the correct rhythm. And so that the shoulder is actually, the shoulder joint itself is actually protected. So this ball does not hit that. So when you have impingement, see this tendon right here? If I can zoom into this guy, right? So this is supraspinatus. And they all come in and they all share one common tendon. And the problem is that, of course, they come right underneath this bony outcrop here. This is the acromion. So if there's any degree of flexibility issues, so for example, your traps are too tight, let's give some more muscle here to this fella. Let's put a whole bunch of tissue on here. All right. So what impacts the shoulder? Well, your pecs being too tight, right? Your pecs are too tight, which means you have rounded shoulders. Your neck muscles are too tight, which again pulls the shoulder forward. Your anterior, part of the anterior delt's too tight, which pulls the shoulder forward. We have muscles here that are too tight, which elevates the shoulder. Think what the elevation would do to the shoulder. It takes the shoulder and jams it into that prominence. Remember what I was talking about the acromion? So it jams into that acromion. And what happens that, of course, we're too weak here in the rotator cuff and we're too weak here in the trapezius muscles, right? And that's part of the problem. Well, that's really the big crux of the problem. So again, when you get into areas like frozen shoulder, it just means that, of course, the connective tissue, everything inside the shoulder joint, has adhered to itself. So it became sticky like glue. And that's why you get into some of those manipulations. So, and again, the problem is, what do we do day to day? What is our general posture day to day? Well, it's not, our posture day to day is actually counterproductive, because it actually, what ends up happening is that this thing gets pulled forward because of the tightness in the anterior portion of the body, and it gets elevated upward. And so part of the ongoing challenge is we have to modulate our day-to-day behavior and be aggressive and consistent, where we're consistently stretching this and stretching all the stuff here and actually strengthening the posterior chain. Stretch this and stretching all this, getting rid of all this tension here, and then immediately going through and working on the posterior chain, making this stuff here much stronger, right? So it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to contend with, right? It's quite a bit of a challenge. It's not impossible, but once you're there, then it takes a lot of work to get out of there. And if it's a passive behavior, meaning that, well, for the most part, you don't worry about it, and because you don't feel it, and it's not an ongoing, what's the word? There's not pain associated to it, just restriction, then you'll probably forget about it, and it'll drift back to the back of your mind, and you won't think about it at all. So in order to actually deal with something like this, you have to look at what you do day to day, challenge your behaviors day to day, which means that you're going to pay attention to the things that are going to make it worse, and then multiple times a day, not once a day or 2 or 3 times a week, multiple times a day, you're going to go in and you're going to, again, take a few moments to stretch what is tight and strengthen what is weak. And be really consistent on it, right? And then, of course, try to change your environment. They call it ergonomics. Change your environment so that you're not put into postures that are going to make this worse. All right. So again, there is no specifics because each shoulder issue is a bit different. But you have to understand the concepts. If you're working with physio and understand what they're giving you, then of course you use a SAM acronym when you're doing your stretching. Use a SAM acronym when you're actually doing your training exercises, and it'll all make a massive difference. But repetitive, and I would say 2 to 3 times a day, every day for a minimum of 2 weeks to really get the ball rolling. Otherwise, again, it's way too passive, and so much of our other behavior is kind of counterproductive. So hopefully that helps, and again, at least it's a good place to start a conversation.